Welcome to Life Happens, where Texans come to protect their legacy and prepare for the second half of life. Join your host, attorney Kim Hegwood with Hegwood Law Group, and our weekly guest as we navigate the challenges that emerge as life happens. Now here's your host, Kim Hegwood.
Good morning and welcome to Life Happens with me, Kim Hegwood, and our very special guest, Dr. Liz. And good morning.
Good morning.
So today we're going to be talking about something that's really true to our hearts, in my office, because we're always very concerned about people taking advantage of elderly people. And so we see it happen a lot, unfortunately. So we always want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to educate, to make sure that people understand that there are consequences, out there. So I'm super excited to have you on the show today. And so one of the things that we wanted to ask you is that we have people that this occurs with, so what could someone have done prior, maybe a family member, caregiver, loved one, that may have made it where maybe it didn't happen. So maybe they caught something earlier, like maybe warning signs or things that they should have said that said, hey, what could we do to kind of make sure that this doesn't happen?
Well, that is the $64 million question. So that is not what our society is set up for. I'm a geriatrician, and that means I have extra training for care of elders. I was also assistant professor at UCSF and a consultant to the Elder Abuse Forensic Center. So I've seen the whole gamut. What is really difficult in our society is to identify early when something is going off the rails, when someone no longer has the ability to make the decisions for themselves, or it might be that they don't have dementia, but they're at risk for undue influence. And I'll try and be brief about all of these things. As people get older, they have the right to do what they want. I've seen a lot of times like, well, mom's just being stubborn. And what's important for us to do is to figure out what is them being stubborn, and it's their right to do it the way they want to, and what is their brain not functioning the way it should be, and it makes them vulnerable to being taken advantage of or to getting hurt, not being able to get the care that they need. So the things that I would suggest is someone might have a change in personality. They might have a change in empathy. When we think of dementia, we think of someone who kind of doesn't know where things are and they can't remember anything and they ask the same questions over and over. There are a number of times when it might be that someone has just, and actually you'd be interested in this from the legal aspect, they might have only lost their risk assessment. And of course, if we do a CAT scan, we can see that there's a problem in the temporal orbital area. So if it exists on an MRI, then it actually exists. And what that is they might look perfect. They can know the day, the date, the president, they can repeat 3 words, but they can't learn from risk assessment. They can't learn from their losses. So it is something that you might start to look at patterns, that if someone continues to lose a lot of money, gambling, we think, okay, they've got a gambling addiction. If like one lady was wanting to have someone help her move furniture. So she was going out on the street at 11 at night looking for people to help her. That's a big red flag that she's losing her judgment. It's also even more difficult with people who've been very successful and powerful because they're like, yeah, I'm fine, not a problem. And you're going to have to figure out ways to understand what's going on, because I've heard many times that, they will make poor investment decisions, or they'll let, a sweetheart in or a caregiver, and their assets can be completely wiped out in the span of a couple months.
Yeah.
So one of the things that you can do is you can kind of just test them. You can have them draw a clock, an analog clock, where you put on all the numbers and then have them put the hands on for 10 minutes after 11. And don't get more specific than that, because usually they should know that, the small one's on the 11 and the big one's on the 2. But, if their abstract thinking is off, they might put it on the 10 or the 11. or they might not get all the numbers in place, or they might put in too many hands. So you need to know that. And then the other one thing you can do is you can have them calculate something simple, like what's 25% of $22.50. If you're in charge of all your finances, you better be able to do that. And so if they, can't figure out what it is, or they figure out it's, the numbers are 562, but they have it down as $56.20, and they can't kind of work back from it and figure out what's wrong with it, that's a huge red flag. They shouldn't be doing things themselves. So if you take them to the doctor, and often what they'll do there is just these general screens. It is a mini mental status exam, or the MOCA, which they ask you to, tell the day, the date, draw a design, do a three-step do a three-step task. And, you can have a perfect score, but you might still have lost your judgment and not be able to understand something that's really risky or something that's dangerous. And in that situation, let me back up a minute. The MOCA, or the Montreal Cognitive Assessment, is a little bit better, because there you have to be a little bit more abstract. They have a field of letters and numbers, and you go from a letter to number to a letter to number. So it's A to 1 to B to 2. And if you're losing the ability to abstract that, there's a problem. That said, that often means nothing to the person who's got brain problems, or something called anagnosia, or like Rumsfeld's unknown unknowns. They don't think there's a problem. And what I've seen is the most common kind of dementia is Alzheimer's disease, where things kind of generally get more fuzzy, that, they may forget to take their medications, they may forget their appointments, like someone I know. And they just kind of are a little bit more withdrawn and detached. The people, particularly who have like diabetes and high blood pressure and vascular disease and small little strokes, they're really tough, because they look just fine. Mm-hmm. And I've seen many times where they look just fine, but then they can't remember the next day what they did. Flat out. If you can figure out things with information on a piece of paper, that's great. But you've got to remember what you did a couple of days ago to be able to make reasoned, particularly financial decisions. And I've seen a number of even neuropsychologists, and those are the people who you do want to do the evaluation. If someone, has a good screen from a mini mental of 26, 30, but things are weird, you want a neuropsychologist. And they're different than a psychiatrist or a psychologist, because they do specific task-oriented testing to see which parts of your brain work and which parts don't. But even there, they might say, oh yeah, they can read a piece of paper and they can tell me everything I need to know. But then I've gone to see that same person, they can't remember what they had for breakfast. If they can't do that, they can't remember that, Jimmy borrowed $50,000 from them, and that, Jimmy's asked for it several times. So that's when we need to kind of step up and figure out plan B.
We find that there's like two schools of, I want to say schools of thought, but there's really two different patterns that we see in my office. The kids are coming in because they're saying, Mom or Dad, there's a problem. And we can't get them to the doctor. Or now what's our next steps? Because we're not sure what to do. And then you find the kids that you see their parents, and you think, oh my God, this person shouldn't be living alone. And the kids are like, oh no, they're fine. They still cook. They still clean. Everything's fine. And you're like, no, there's, you should obviously do not spend enough time with them to notice that there's a lot of things going on, so we find that, really trying to get good, get people to move in the direction they need to move is sometimes a lot harder than you would expect. And so,
well, socially, we're not wired. So we're wired to kind of look at patterns. And if people socially sound okay, then we give them a pass. They're like, okay, they're fine. I mean, and even doctors don't have a lot of training to know, what sorts of things are problematic. If you go in and say, well, Mrs. Smith, how are you doing? Fine. Any pain? Nope. Any problem with your medications? Nope. Anything that you're concerned about? Nope. I mean, it may be that they're not really asking the questions to see if there's a problem. And I see that. So the way to address it. So you have the elder who denies that there's a problem and the family's concerned. What we often do, and you can't make someone go in for an evaluation, except for these days you can do a video visit. You know, not that I'm here to plug myself, but we do telehealth online. So I've done video visits with families where you can talk to someone and you can just get the information you need to at least start the ball rolling to say, oh no, they need more evaluation. And back, you know, when I worked for the Elder Abuse Forensic Center, if someone is at risk, they're not taking care of themselves, you know, they've been swindled, but the Adult Protective Services worker comes to the door, the elder can say, sorry, I'm fine, you know, I don't need your help. And that's that. Well, my job was to go back and talk to that person. And often you can talk to someone at the door, you know, and kind of figure out what's going on. And then from that point, I could make an assessment back to Adult Protective Services, suggesting that this person needs more evaluation. And it's a lot easier these days to do it on video. So that's kind of the first way that you can get in there. The other way I advise to do it is my friend's father was a successful accountant and he had small strokes, but he didn't think there was anything wrong. What I suggest families do is kind of work to help support and put a buffer around the elder, particularly if they've got, you know, the good caregivers that will help the family and keep the predators from calling in, you know, who try and take advantage, like, you know, just send us your bank account number and then we'll send you $1 million, you know, to prevent those calls. You know, even elders can be abused by charities. You know, the charities send the list and the abusers totally send the list. Once you've been taken in by one scammer, your name goes on a list and then they sell it. So you need someone to protect you to do that. And I've had situations where they didn't want to confront the elder, but they've intercepted the mail, they've intercepted the phone calls. So they protect them that way. And then there's, when you can, you have someone reliable on their bank account and know where their assets are to help manage the assets, you know, with the fiduciary responsibility, meaning they're doing it for the elder. They're not, you know, skimming some for themselves.
Yeah. So we're talking about, you know, about trying to make sure that we, you know, prevent elder, you know, abuse, you know, when it comes to financial and things like that. So one of the other, you know, it's one thing to get a scammer to, you know, to call and, you know, and have people, you know, send them money. But let's talk a little bit more about something a little closer to home. So what we find is a lot of times that the largest group of people that are taking advantage of the elderly are caregivers and family members. And
Yes.
so by, you know, doing, you know, just not doing well by them, you know, the legal term is, you know, is undue influence. I know, you know, and but let's talk a little bit about that for our listeners to kind of give them a little more education and some more knowledge so they know what's to look for and how it's happening and things like that.
So undue influence means that you're using persuasion to get an elder to do something that's not in their best interest, but benefits the abuser. And I can give you a very good example of, you know, it's often the elder who's lost a spouse. You know, there was a woman who the contractor came in to work on the house after she lost her husband. Well, then he started spending more time with her. And then he married her. And then he got control of her accounts. And then he put a restraining order on her previous lawyer, her daughter, her friends, and isolated her. She had not been diagnosed with having dementia. She did have Parkinson's and eventually, you know, was found to not have capacity. But by that time, he was kind of entrenched. And that's kind of the most gut-wrenching situation, is someone outside coming in to do that. There's the most common, as we know, abusers are the family members who feel like mom doesn't need it. Or, the thing that kills me is the Medi-Cal estate planning. And it's like, well, mom's got $5 million and we don't want her to, just lose that money. So we're going to put that in a Medi-Cal trust. So her $5 million will go to us. And when she needs it, she'll go into a nursing home, into a Medicaid nursing home bed, which is not very nice. So that's the first thing that I really have a problem with, and that's a little bit more sanitized. Then you've got, like Jimmy, who never quite got the good job, but figures mom owes him and is taking money out of the account. And sometimes Jimmy, won't get mom the health care that she needs. That is, if you see an elder being abused anyway, whether they're not having their medical issues cared for, whether they are having their finances used for someone else, you need to step up and say something. You can report it to the Adult Protective Services, and Adult Protective Services is there to protect elders, but they're, fashioned after Child Protective Services. And that's mainly, bodily. It's health, it's bodily, it's, not being hurt. They're not as good about figuring out, did Mr. Smith really want to give his caregiver, $50,000 just because he wanted to help her out, or did she take that from him? So what I advise is, if you have standing, and what standing is it's someone, and you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, someone who is connected to that person, either by relationship or they're a beneficiary when the person dies, to say, well, this is not okay. And what I always say is, if you have concerns, you need to talk to a good elder law attorney, and you probably need a fiduciary. So the whole issue of, the sweetheart swindle and meeting that, pretty young thing, to marry the old man and get his money, I always like to say, well, if you're wealthy and you want to marry Anna Nicole Smith, that's fine, as long as you understand the risks and the benefits that come along with Anna Nicole Smith. And what I often advise people to do is, you should put the money in the trust, that it can't be touched from the outside, and the trust is only used for the elder. And then this young person still wants to, have them, then I think that is terrific.
Yeah. We do a lot of trust planning, in my office to protect people. So most definitely.
Uh-oh. I've somehow lost you.
Well, we lost Dr. Liz, but we want to thank her so much for coming on the show today. And if you'd like to talk with Dr. Liz, you can reach her at www.drlizgeriatrics.com. You can also find her on Facebook at Dr. Liz Geriatrics, or call 844-DRLIZED.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Life Happens with Kim Hegwood. Be sure to tune in every Thursday at 10 a.m. wherever you listen to your podcast, as we navigate through the challenges that emerge as life happens. The content of this podcast does not establish an attorney-client relationship or constitute attorney-client privilege, legal, medical, financial, or any other professional advice.